Hey, what's going on, everybody? Special guest here. It's Steve Gorten. I saw you at the Miami Hurricanes basketball games this season. We go back a long ways, obviously, and we both have a love for college basketball. So it's great. Also, you cover, sports with the Miami Herald and the Palm Beach Post. So let's get into it, Steve. We're here to talk about Jay Lucas. The haul right now is at 7 players. A lot of excitement with the Hurricanes and what he's been able to build so far for his first season roster. Steve, just your kind of, we'll go down by player. We'll kind of break this down and kind of what we're seeing backcourt, front court, maybe even some ideas of what to look forward to first. But your overall takeaways. What are your takeaways with the guys that he's got on board so far? These 7 players.
I've been really impressed with what he's been able to do. The transfer portal really gives you a chance to really elevate your program immediately. If you take a look at what Louisville did a year ago with Pat Kelsey, right? They went from 8-24 to a team that was an NCAA tournament team, ACC runner-up. I kind of see Miami in the same situation. And like Louisville, he was able to add a lot of veterans. That's what's impressive. All these guys have major experience, P4 schools. They have NCAA tournament experience. You look at Trey Donaldson, what he's been able to do at Michigan and Auburn before. Through Washington, he's won 53 games the last 2 years as part of that New Mexico program. Um, you know, Malik coming over from Indiana, another big time program. So he's been able to add the experience. Essentially, they're going to have a brand new starting lineup, which is going to make the next 5 months important to make sure those guys mesh.
Steve, one of the things, and we kind of feel like we're just still learning the transfer portal as a whole, how quickly things can either get. You touched on the Louisville example. That's such a great example. New coach, a program that was down, losing a ton of games, and Pat comes in and the positive energy and the pieces seem to fit. And obviously, they're off to a good start in his tenure there. With Jay, it's somewhat similar in terms of that positive energy. Doesn't have the coaching experience that Pat had, but just that positive energy. And I think that's going to be something that helps with this program and as guys. When I look at the roster too, I think what stands out to me, Steve, is they got those top guys early. And I think when you get those top guys with Trey and Malik Reneau there, I think those two kind of set the tone of what the roster could be. And then you kind of fill in from there, the different pieces. But it's so much easier to me. It feels like if you're going to build a roster and they have 13 spots to fill, so they still have 6 more that they could add. I think if you're able to add those top level guys and then kind of work off of that, I think that's such an easier build when you're going for a complete overhaul. And starting with Trey, Steve, because to me that's where it starts. At the point guard spot, I had a chance to talk with Jay about what he wants in a point guard. Obviously, a former point guard himself. And there were a couple things that stood out to me, but obviously he likes positional size all across the board, across the roster. But with Trey, and he didn't speak specifically about Trey because this was before he came on board, but he wants a point guard, to be an extension of him. And we hear that a lot. What does that mean? But basically, they got to be on the same page with a lot of things. And I think for him to identify Trey, I think that says a lot about him. I had a chance to watch Trey throughout the season. He was a guy I paid close attention to at Michigan early on. So definitely very, very familiar with him. One thing that stands out to me with Trey, won a bunch of games. You touched on True, but yeah, they won a bunch of games at Michigan this past season, the champs there in the Big Ten. But Trey has a unique ability to be able to fill up things in a hurry. He can get buckets in a hurry. He can load up the assist. There's games where he had some rebounds. So he's a guy that can kind of fill it up. And I like what he does defensively as well. But I think starting at the point guard spot, I think they got a good one in Trey Donaldson. I expect him to be one of the best point guards in the ACC. 11 points a game last year, the 4 assists. But it wouldn't surprise me if those numbers increase a little bit, particularly his scoring. I think his shooting percent number at around 43, I think that could be a little bit higher. Because based on his ability, I think going into year 4, I think that could be he could be a little bit more efficient as a scorer. But I like what I've seen in Trey.
Yeah, definitely. And he's a physical guy in the paint, so he can take the contact in there. I think if you look at a game like his UCLA, like the game he had against UCLA last season, is really encouraging. I think that's the best of what you can get with Trey. I think he had 20 points, 7 assists, 6 rebounds. So you can see the all-around performance that he can really give you. But yeah, it all really starts with the point guard. If he can run things for this team. That could be huge.
With Malik Reneau deciding to come back to Miami, a guy that, played here as a prep. I remember watching him in
Mm-hmm.
high school. He was a guy that one of these early names, one of these guys to clearly watch for. That's the kind of prospect he was, and then he goes to Indiana. For him to come back, I know that that's a big thing. I know Jay talked about that. I talked to him about that, just these local talent in the area, not just guys coming up at the high school ranks. There's a lot of good players coming up, but getting guys to come back home. And Malik decided to do that. Plays the four, kind of an interesting spot with him. I think one of the things, he's athletic, he can rebound, he's a left-handed shooter, finishes at the rim really well. One of these guys that real crafty around the rim in terms of getting his shot up. As a left-handed guy, likes to finish at the rim. I'm surprised he hasn't developed a shot, kind of a mid-range or even a three-point shot over his career. So that's going to be interesting to see how it kind of fits in, kind of with Ernest Uday, the TCU center transfer, another low block kind of player. So those two guys a little bit similar in terms of where they're going to get their buckets. I think Malik, obviously a better player, better scorer, but I'm interested to see how he kind of fits in and how this all kind of fits together. But I think Malik, wouldn't surprise me. I touched on Trey being one of the best point guards. Malik should be, healthy after the knee injury last year, kind of getting past that. But he should be able to be one of those top post players in the ACC. And I think if we're trying to pick out who's going to be the leading scorer, I think certainly he comes in with the most points, 13 a game last year. I think he could be a guy that, 13, 14, 15, 16. Can he get up to 16? We'll see. But I think the scoring definitely needs to be there for Malik. But I do like what he brings to the table, even if he doesn't have that kind of stretch four game right now.
And speaking of Malik being from Miami, one of the things Coach Lucas really talked about was the talent in Florida, right? And look at the guys that he picked up. Trey Donaldson, originally from Tallahassee. He picked up Uday from Orlando. So he got the guys from Miami. I believe Dante Allen, right, from Miami.
From Miami.
So you can really see so far his impact, right? He came here with the emphasis on fixing the defense and with recruiting, and already you can see the talent he's been able to bring in. And we haven't even talked about Shelton Henderson yet. That's a humongous get for him. And, I think that, his ability to get the guys from the state of Florida, his ability to bring in talent is huge. One thing interesting about UW that I noticed when they signed him was a quote that he said about him. Obviously, he's not a big-time scorer. He's more of an elite rebounder, a really great guy in terms of setting screens. But he said he said about his personality, he said, that's what's really important for us is to start to build a culture here at Miami. He sees him as the guy to drive this culture, right? To be an extension of the coaching staff. So in that aspect, more than anything he does stats-wise, they look at him as the guy to help build the foundation, to kind of be the extension between the coaches and the players.
He touched on defensively. He wanted to have a good defensive team. Jay said, I want to have a good defensive team. That's important. I think Trey's going to bring that the point guard spot and Ernest at the center spot. You touched on his rebounding being good. I think he's got an ability. He's shown the ability to block some shots, kind of be a presence there. I don't expect him to be a big scorer, probably a single-digit scorer at Miami like he's been where he's been in the past. So, but I do like that. The culture is going to be big, and I think, listen to Jay talk about certain things. Yes, things have changed since he was a player over basketball time. Things have changed, but he said kids are still kids. And I think that they're still going to try to implement culture and still implement certain values into a program that, yes, the players could change. We're seeing the big overhaul this year. We saw it last summer too, when Jim Larinaga was here with 10 new players. So we're seeing the turnover, but I think kind of establishing identities, establishing culture is going to be big. Steve, what do you make of Shelton Henderson? 5-star player, signed with Duke, decommits from the same high school as Jay Lucas there in Texas, comes from the JL3 program. It's going to be the program to watch for, the main program in the Nike EYBL circuit because of his father there. Number 14 player in the country, number 2 small forward. What do you make of Shelton's game and maybe the impact or takeaways from Shelton deciding to come to Miami over Duke?
Yeah, that's a huge get for them, especially, a year ago they had a 5-star guy, lost Jaleel Bethea to Alabama, and to be able to get another 5-star guy in Shelton is really big for the program. I see him as potentially being a one and done guy. A lot of talent with him. I think initially you could possibly pencil him in as a starter. If he doesn't start the season as a starter, you can expect him to get big minutes early. And by season's end, I expect him to be a starter. One guy that's interesting is the Slovakian that they signed, Malovec, if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah, Timotej, Malowitz. Yep.
Yeah, he's kind of a mystery. I'm really curious to see his ability because obviously we haven't had a chance to get a good look at him as maybe some of the local guys. But I think the Shelton is going to have an impact with his athleticism, and he's going to be a guy they're really going to need talent wise.
Yeah, Shelton went kind of watching his highlights, and I remember watching him from before. Watch a lot of EYBL games, so I'm very familiar with a lot of those top players and whether Miami's recruiting them or not. I'm always checking in with certain guys, some guys that I like. There was a guy last year that Miami is now interested in, kind of a name to pay attention to, according to a report by Adam Zagaria there, with Caden Lewis, the former Kentucky commit. He's going to visit Miami. He was a guy that I really liked. I don't want to veer off too much, but going back to Shelton, watching him in EYBL circuit, just a guy with good size at 6'6". He's a guy that gets downhill, really good athletic player in transition, finishes at the rim. That's where he gets most of his buckets. I think he do has to develop a three-point shot and a mid-range jumper to go with it to be a kind of a complete player at the college level, but the athleticism jumps off the table, literally. I mean, he's just a great leaper at the rim. I like that he'll go after rebounds. I think that'll be important. I think this team needs scoring, but I don't think they need Shelton, even if he is a starter. And at this point, I would assume he'll be the starter at the three. With True Washington in the backcourt, Trey Donaldson, and then we touched on, with Malik and Ernest there. But Shelton doesn't have to be the top scorer on the team. I think he can kind of fill in, play his role. But I like what he's bringing to the table. I think there's some upside available. Obviously, that's why he's a five-star guy in addition to his athleticism. But I think that's going to be something that's going to be key with him. Just kind of develop a shot, feel comfortable with it. He does have the ability, kind of seeing some games there. He will kind of pull up on some mid-range stuff, but really, he's a downhill guy. He's going to go to the rim, and he's just a great leaper at finishing at the rim. So that's what stands out to me with Shelton. And for Miami to get a player like this, I think that's what's so interesting, Steve. We talk about Jay's vision for this team, for the program, taking over. You're seeing these things kind of immediately, getting some key transfers. This isn't one of these things where you're like, okay, they got one guy or some interesting guys that it's going to take some time, whether it's recruiting, building a roster, winning games. You get a guy like Shelton. It's not the vision in the future. It's happening right now. We're going to get a top guy. We're going to get top recruits. I really like Dante Allen as a recruit. I like what they're doing in building the roster. And just kind of the way it's pieced together. Again, 6 more spots available. I want to get your take, though. These other guys, you touched on Malowitz, that interesting player, kind of watching his highlights. Obviously didn't know anything about him. Watching his highlights, looks like a guy that can kind of shoot it, been playing professionally there, been playing in Serbia, and he's a guy from Slovakia, has represented his national team there at times. So he's a guy,
Great
Dante
shooter, by the
Allen.
way.
What's
I'm
that?
sorry, I was going to say great shooter, by the way. I think 40% from three, so yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's big, and just the kind of the transition to college basketball that'll be interesting. True Washington, we haven't touched on him. He was a guy, when I was kind of breaking down these teams and looking at who could be Miami's next head coach. New Mexico was a team that I paid attention to. Richard Pitino was a guy that I thought could be an option for Miami. So watching the players, True Washington jumped out to me as a player, a really intriguing player. A guy who I thought would be a potential portal candidate a long time ago before Jay Lucas and all that, and here he is. Plays defense, knocks down some threes, 33% shooter, kind of led New Mexico in three-pointers there with 41. Not a huge number. Trey Donaldson had more. But I like what True's bringing to the team defensively. Gets steals, deflections, 6'4". He's going to be able to guard the backcourt, one of the top scorers on the other team. I like that piece, with what he's added there.
Yeah, good rebounding guard, too, I think, averaging four a game. But, that's another guy that, we talk about Jay's connection through Duke with Shelton. But he had a connection, obviously, with True, too, having recruited Timotej Washington, who, interestingly enough, True is a younger uncle to Timotej. But he recruited Timotej Washington at Kentucky when he was with Calipari's staff. So he had that relationship with the family there, in addition to the relationship he had with Shelton. So, yeah, I think I think True, can really have an immediate impact. As you can see on this roster, a lot of guys that are plug and play guys, right? You're not having to wait on guys having to develop, and that I think that's part of Jay's philosophy is building right away. This isn't a 3-4 year project. I think he's hoping to lift Miami from bottom level ACC team to an NCAA tournament caliber team in the first year.
We're touching a lot about Jay Lucas and what his impact is. Look, I think the administration deserves, and the Canes, everybody involved with the resources being put into the program, I think they deserve a lot of credit with the NIL money that has been reported, and obviously seeing the guys that they're getting. That's good to see, and hopefully fan base responds. I think there is a lot of excitement on InsideTheU.com, on our message boards of what's being built, and hopefully that continues. Hopefully we see some bigger crowds moving forward. Steve, I want to get to kind of your final thoughts on what you think this team still needs. I do want to touch on Dante Allen, because he was a guy that I just really liked as a player coming up through high school ranks in Miami, son of Malik Allen, and then goes to Montverde. I thought he was productive there, played well, played for the Knight Riders organization, a huge program, obviously, with what they were able to do, winning all those Nike titles, EYBL. And Dante, all-around guy, all-around performer as a player. I like his all-around game, plays both ends, can shoot it, drive it, pass it. One of those kind of all-around guys. And I think he's going to be a great guy for the program. I think I like his mentality. I like his maturity. I think he's a great addition. And as soon as it kind of popped up that he was leaving Villanova, I thought he'd be a great fit. I thought he'd be a great fit under any coaching staff. I think he's going to be he has a chance to be a really good college player. And I'm interested to see his development. But Steve, final thoughts on what this team still needs to add. I want to ask you, and then I'll kind of provide my thoughts, some things that I'm thinking of. Again, 6 spots are still available. Will they be able to fill all 6? I touched on Acadian Lewis as a guy that'll visit as a point guard. I really like his game. But what do you think this team still needs maybe to round out their team, or what they should be looking for?
Really quickly on Dante, you're absolutely right. I mean, his versatility is huge as a combo guard. He's a guy that can provide backup minutes at point. Also, valuable minutes as shooting guard. But in terms of what they need to add, I'd really like to see them add another big. I think another a 5 or a backup guy there on the inside. I think would be huge. I think they need to make sure they add some depth in the front court. With the 6 spots, I think that there's still a lot of guys available on the board for them to go after. Lewis is going to be a difficult guy to try to land, just because the competition for him. I know there's a lot of schools after him, but obviously you want to shoot for trying to get. You're going to shoot for him, trying to land him. But I think adding a lot of depth pieces, because right now I think, as you noted, they feel comfortable with their starting lineup, but they don't have a lot of depth and guys that they feel they can count on to provide those minutes, or if there's their injuries.
Yeah, I think that they've got to get some wing scoring. I'd like to see a little bit more 3-point shooters into this team, whether it's off the bench and kind of some plug and play lineup situations. I touched on earlier with the 4-5, kind of with Malik and Ernest being low block scorers. Shelton isn't known for his 3-point shooting. So, and even Drew Washington, I touched on 33%. I do like what Trey Donaldson brings, 38% shooter from 3, hit over 63s. I think he could be a guy that shoots threes. He shot over 4 a game last year. But I think just getting a little bit more wing 3-point shooting, maybe getting a stretch 4 in there, and not necessarily to start, but maybe to kind of mix up lineups if you want to drop Malik to a 5 and play some lineup, maybe some small ball matchup lineup things. But I'd like to see a little bit more 3-point shooting. I think they've got to get a point guard. I do like what Dante brings as a kind of a filler, as you mentioned, a combo guard, can play point, can play off the ball. But I'd like to see that ball handling point guard to kind of ease the pressure off of Trey in terms of minutes. So I'd like to see them kind of get like a true ball handling point guard. You touched on the bigs. You can never have enough bigs, and maybe they get a developmental big. If you touch on, if they're trying to build out a lineup, how do you kind of envision a lineup of 8 or 9 guys throughout the season? But that still gives you a few spots. That's some developmental spots maybe the year after. So I think, if you can kind of get a developmental big, I think it's interesting that they went to the international ranks there to get Malovec. but they could continue to do that because it is hard to find players with maybe the JUCO ranks. There was a guy, Bo Aldridge, a guy that I've liked since high school, a really intriguing athletic player, had a really good year at Hutch, a JUCO player. That's intrigued me. A guy that plays both ends, athletic, was going to go to Arizona State, didn't work out there. But I think they just got to continue to kind of look for all kinds of players to fill this roster out. But I do think there's reasons to be excited, especially when you look around the ACC. Teams are bringing guys back, but what does the haul coming in look like? I think Miami's got to feel good. You touched on, maybe this could be a tournament team, not a bottom ACC team like they were last year. Can this team be an NCAA tournament team? And I think certainly that should be the goal.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen some other teams in the ACC upgrade as well. This offseason with Clemson adding some guys, North Carolina adding some guys, but definitely, I feel like the conference as a whole has gotten better, and I feel like Miami's gotten considerably better. So I think now it'll be important to see 5+ months, I guess, before the season opener against Jacksonville, November 3rd. We'll have to see how this lineup fits together, how well it meshes together, and we're going to get our first chance to see how Jay manages the team as well.
Yeah, great stuff, Steve. As I mentioned earlier, we go way back and both have a love for college basketball. So this is great. Your time is valuable. Great stuff. I feel like we could have talked a long time about all these new guys. There's so much more to talk about, but hopefully we're able to do this again. But I appreciate you, man.
All right. Thanks a lot.